Hey everyone, so welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be about how to answer the question for unseen poetry. It will look at the things that are included in the question and what is expected of you from the examiner. So what is it? Unseen poetry is the last question on English Literature Paper 2. It's divided into two parts. So you're given two poems and two questions. There's a lot of twos in this. It seems to be paired up quite well. So what are the two parts? Part 1 is you're given a single poem. You won't know who it's by or what it is until the actual day of the exam. You're asked to look at how the poet presents the effect of a topic within the poem. I won't be able to tell you what you're looking at because I don't know what the poem is, but it will be a how question, which means you'll be looking at language features. And this question is worth 24 marks. So you're going to be spending an awful lot of time on this question alone. Part 2 is there's two poems in this part. The one you've just done in part 1 and a new one that you've not seen. You'll need to compare the differences and or similarities. It will be dependent on the question. They may ask you to do differences, they may ask you to do similarities, or they may ask you to do both. Read the question to find out what exactly you're answering. And this question is worth 8 marks. So the section together is worth 32 marks. But the majority of the marks will be for part 1, which is why you'll be spending the majority of your time on that question. What is being assessed? So AO1 and AO2 will be assessed in these questions. AO1 is to read, understand and respond to text, and students should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response. Use textual references, including quotations, to support and illustrate interpretations. AO2 is to analyze the language, form and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects using relevant subject terminology where appropriate. This is where AO2 is focusing on language, form and structure. AO1 is how much you understand the text and how you respond to what is being asked. So what should you do for part 1? First thing I always recommend is for you to write down form and structure. So establish what form the poem is written in. Is it a sonnet, free verse, blank verse, villanelle, ballad, ode, whatever? If you don't know what it's called, look at the structure. You may not always remember in exam conditions all of the characteristics of these different types of forms, but I advise you to revise it and memorize them so you're quite familiar with it. How many lines does it have? Does it have a rhyme scheme? Or a specific rhythm? The number of stanzas? Looking at all of that will establish the form and structure, and I recommend you get that out of the way as your very first paragraph in order to make sure you haven't forgotten to do it later on in the exam. Number 2, read the question. So, sounds like an obvious thing to do, but it is essential. You need to know what you should be answering before you start to annotate the poem. I've noticed a lot of students go straight into annotating the poem and they find a multitude of language features, but some of them don't actually answer the question, so you've just wasted time. If you don't know the question, then you don't know what to look for in the poem. That is basically the gist of read the question. They will ask you how the poet shows something. So we're looking at language features and words and phrases. Language. So you may be able to find a large number of language features, but, capital letters, but You should only focus on the ones that answer your question. Every time you find one, write down how it answers your question so you don't forget and can remember later. This is in the first 5 minutes. You might find a metaphor that answers the question perfectly, but you need to quickly jot down how it answers it. Otherwise, it's a waste of you just writing metaphor next to it. So look at some language features you may want to remember as metaphor, simile, enjambment, personification, alliteration, and hyperbole. Obviously, there are others, but these are the ones that you'll remember off the top of your head. Writing. Start writing. Sounds simple, sounds weird, but go straight into it because there's no introduction or conclusion is needed, as you have no context, and you should have answered a question in your essay. Like I said, the very first paragraph should be form and structure, and everything after that for each paragraph should be 1 or 2 points of the language features you found that answer the question. Remember to follow the classic Peel format. So point, evidence, analysis, and link. Link to the question. And analysis is for you to analyze how your evidence answers the question. We do not need you to analyze the evidence because you've already said it's a metaphor and then you've given us the evidence. The analysis is how it answers the question. Okay? Remember that, how it answers the question. So what should you do for part 2? This is the 8-mark question. Again, first thing, form and structure. So look at form and structure for this poem as well. You will need to do a comparison of the 2 poems. Again, depending on what they ask you, so you may be looking at similarities and or differences. Comparing the form and structure will be important. They want you to do it, so please do it. Question. Look at the question they are asking you to answer. Do they want you to compare similarities, differences, or both? If you don't know, then you won't get the marks. Looking at the question is always going to be extremely vital. I don't want you to lose marks because you didn't look at what they wanted you to answer. Compare. So compare the writer's use of language, form, and structure. Use correct terminology. We know the forms, we know the structures, we know language features, so that should be okay for you. The words you use are important. The more accurate, the better. Terminology is vital. 4. Effect. So you need to explore the effect of the language. Do not forget this part. The mark scheme clearly states that the higher bands must explore the effects of the language, form, and structure. Now you might be thinking, effect on who? The effect is on you. So what you feel is valid and correct. So how does it affect you? Why did you pick this out? Why did you notice it? Obviously, what you feel is important. What you think is important. So don't forget to add the effect part. Here is an example question. So this is from the June 2017 AQA Unseen Poetry. And I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how you would dissect the question and do a quick answer. So the first poem is Autumn by Alan Bold. I'm not going to read the poem out loud because I don't think you really need it, but I will look at the question. So in Autumn, how does the poet present the effects of the season of autumn? Remember, this is 24 marks. And like I said, the very first thing that I would say is do the form and structure. So it's a single stanza of 17 lines with no specific rhyme or rhythm. That is you very quickly and very easily pointing out form and structure. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's been done and it's a necessity. Now we're going to look at some of the points and things that we have found in the poem that actually answers the question of how does the poet present the effects of the season of autumn. So, personification of autumn as a robber and accomplice, when it's described as like an experienced robber, and the wind is his accomplice. So he's already given the season human characteristics, which makes it seem like it's not exactly a positive description. Both robber and accomplice are negative words. So ideas related to cold and negativity, such as chills. Alliteration of cunningly covering, autumn arrives, and grabbing green. These all suggest, again, that he does not think very positively about the season that has come and stolen away summer. And the juxtaposition of placid sky and quiet rage in the last two lines, till the normally placid sky glows red with a quiet rage. Using those two opposites, placid means calm, and obviously rage means anger. So having those two juxtaposing ideas shows how he feels extremely negatively about the season. So this is the sort of thing I would want you to do when you're quickly jotting down your ideas. Find the language feature and explain how it answers the question. So the way the poet presents the effects of the season of autumn. Wasn't too bad, was it? So this is the second poem. In this, the poem is called Today by Billy Collins. So in both Today and Autumn, the speakers describe attitudes towards the seasons. What are the similarities and or differences between the ways the poet presents these attitudes? This one is 8 marks, and luckily, because they have asked you to look at similarities and or differences, you can do one, either, or both. This is the advantage to this question. You can look at both sides of it all. So again, first thing I do, form and structure. This poem has 8 stanzas of 2 lines each, couplets. A single sentence from the start to the end. The only full stop is at the very last bit. It's enjambment, continuous enjambment. Okay? Comparisons. So both use alliteration when talking about the seasons. Comparisons between the gardens bursting with peonies and autumn shaking branches and dead leaves. Positive and or negative language used to describe the season. So today is a bit more of a positive poem. It's talking about the wonders of spring, whereas autumn is talking about it being a thief and stealing summer away. Autumn is entrapping and spring is a release. So these are just a few quick points that I pointed out. Luckily, you don't need to go into as much detail with this question as it is 8 marks, but again, it's a bit easier since you are doing a comparison of the two. So things to remember. The unseen poetry questions are not there to punish you, but to challenge you. You would have studied poetry for a very long time, so you know forms, structures, and different poetic devices. You can do it. Go with your feelings and your interpretations. I've given you examples of what I found. You might find something completely different, but that does not mean it's incorrect. It's your interpretation. Don't be afraid to annotate the poems. You're allowed to. I've been asked this a couple times, and I find it odd that people don't know this, but you can annotate the poems that are in front of you. Jot down your ideas as quickly as possible and as soon as you read the question, so you don't forget what comes into your head straight away. And go back to basics. Peel. Always remember point, evidence, analysis, and link. Especially link. Make sure you're answering the question and not just writing anything down. So was this video useful? It's a bit longer than the ones I normally make, mainly because there was so much I wanted to get down, but if you did enjoy it, thank you. Follow me on my social medias, which is Hana.iam on Instagram and I am Hana.iam on Twitter. Share, like, and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions. I will try to answer as many of them as I can, as clearly as I can, and don't be shy about asking anything. If it helps you, I am happy to answer it. And I'll see you next time.